People ask me sometimes what the bravest thing I ever did was. They expect me to say something about a code crash in the ICU, or the night we had 4 ambulances at once, and I was the only nurse on the floor. I let them think that. The true answer is smaller and quieter, and it happened on a Tuesday in November, when the hospital smelled like old radiator heat, and the overnight halls were the color of old bone. His name was on the chart as Gerald Munro, but I would learn later that nobody had called him that in 40 years. To the men who rode with him, to the men who would have taken a bullet for him without a second thought, he was Dutch. Founding president of the Iron Crossing Motorcycle Club. 69 years old, liver failure advanced. Alone, I had come on for the night shift at 11. The day nurse gave me his room number, the way you hand someone a problem you are glad to be done with. Biker, she said. Like that explained the stiffness in her voice. Nobody's come to see him. He's not been easy. I went in expecting hard. What I found was a very large old man lying very still, his arms outside the blanket, his hands open on the sheet like he had stopped reaching for something. The tattoos ran all the way to his collar. There was a patch of greasy gray beard and eyes the color of creek water in winter, and when he heard me come in, he turned his head maybe an inch, which I would come to understand was a significant gesture of welcome from a man who had spent a lifetime letting very little in. I did the checks. I adjusted the drip. I asked him if he needed anything, and he said, in a voice that had traveled a long road to get that low, that he would not mind if someone turned off the overhead light. I turned it off. I pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down. I do not know exactly why I stayed that first hour. It was not pity. Pity looks at a person and steps back. I sat forward. There was something in the room that needed witnessing, the way a storm needs witnessing, the way any large and honest thing does. So I stayed. He did not talk much that night. I read to him from a magazine I found on the windowsill, a long piece about a cross-country road trip, and after a while his breathing slowed in a way that meant he was listening. Once he said, almost to himself, that he had ridden that stretch of highway in New Mexico in 1987, and the sky had been a color he never saw again. I told him that sounded about right for New Mexico. The corner of his mouth moved. I went back every hour. The other rooms needed me, and I did not neglect them. But when I had a free stretch, I came back and sat. Around 3 in the morning, he woke from a light sleep and looked at me with those creekwater eyes and said, "You didn't leave." I told him it was my shift. He looked at me a moment longer and then looked at the ceiling and said, "Most people leave." I reached over and put my hand over his, which was rough and very cold, and I did not say anything because there was nothing that needed saying. We stayed like that for a while. He went quietly just before 5 in the morning, when the sky outside the one window was beginning to go from black to the particular dark blue that comes just before anything else. I stayed with him until the light changed. Then I did what needed doing, and I walked back out into the corridor, and I stood there for a moment with my back against the wall, and I let myself feel the weight of it before I carried on. I thought that was the end of the story. 6 weeks later, I was working a day shift, when the charge nurse found me in the break room and said there was a man in the lobby asking for me by name. She said it with a careful face, which told me he looked like someone she was not sure what to make of. I went down. He was big, leather vest, the kind of beard that takes years of intention, and he held his helmet in both hands in front of him, like a man standing in a church. He introduced himself as the vice president of the Iron Crossing Club. He said they had heard what I did for Dutch in his last hours. He said he wanted me to know that the club knew, and that they were grateful, and that they did not forget. I told him I had only done my job. He looked at me for a moment, and then he said, with the particular steadiness of a man who chooses his words like he chooses his roads, that what I had done was not just a job, that Dutch had been alone in that room for 4 days, and I was the only person who had sat with him. He said, Dutch told the one nurse who would listen that a young woman had stayed all night and read to him about New Mexico. He said the club had been trying to reach Dutch in those last days, and the hospital had not passed the messages. And by the time they knew he was critical, it was already over. He said that was on them, not on me, but that they wanted me to know they had heard. I cried in the break room after he left, which was unprofessional, and I did not care. I did not expect to hear from them again after that. Then came February. My ex-boyfriend had been a problem for about 3 months by then. Not a story I will go into in detail because it is not the part that matters, except to say that there had been phone calls, And then there had been appearances outside my building. And I had done the things you are told to do, the police report, and the change locks, and the telling of a few trusted people, and none of it had made me feel safe in any way that lasted past sundown. On a Thursday evening, I came home from a double shift and walked the last half block the way I always did those months, fast and with my keys already out, not looking left or right but seeing everything anyway. I turned the corner to my street and I stopped walking. The street was full of motorcycles. Not a few, not a handful. 72, I would find out later, though in the moment I could not have counted them. They were parked in a long, careful line on both sides of the block, and the men who had ridden them were standing beside their bikes or sitting on their seats, some with coffee, some talking quietly in pairs, all of them facing outward, all of them between me and the building, all of them wearing the iron crossing patch. One of them stepped forward, the VP I had met in the lobby. He said they had heard I was having some trouble. He said they would be around for a while, if that was all right with me. I looked at that wall of leather and chrome in the February cold, and I thought about a room with one lamp and a large old man lying still and the magazine piece about New Mexico, and I understood that what I was looking at was the same thing, the same current running through different ground. I had sat beside something alone and unwitnessed and given it a little dignity, and this was what came back. I said it was more than all right. My ex-boyfriend came that night. I know this because the VP told me so the next morning. He said the man had turned onto the block, seen what was there and left. He said he had not come back. He said, and this was said simply and without drama, that the man was unlikely to come back. He did not come back. The club rode out the next morning in the early light, 72 bikes in a single long thread through the quiet street, and I stood on my steps and watched them go. The VP was last. He raised one hand as he passed, the kind of wave that is also a nod, that is also a promise kept. And then he was gone around the corner, and the street was just a street again. That was 11 years ago. I still get a card every November. Around the Tuesday it happened. No return address, just the iron crossing patch drawn small in the corner of the envelope, and inside, a single line. It says the same thing every year. Dutch didn't die alone. We remember. I keep them in the kitchen drawer, all 11 of them, and sometimes in a quiet moment, I take one out and read it, and I think about what it means to stay beside something when everyone else has gone. I think it means more than we are taught to think it means. I think it is, sometimes, the whole thing.